Thank you, everyone. It's nice to be here and with this regional dialogue. This presentation and discussion is a little bit different because we're going to focus on a case study from Nepal and the relevance for the region. We're all interested in scale and sustainability. Scale and sustainability for people, prosperity, and the planet. And in Nepal, we, meaning development partners, there's 16 development partners in the government of Nepal and other stakeholders, NGOs. We've all been collaborating for the past 3 years on a country platform for joint action on green, resilient, inclusive development. This is really remarkable because there are several policy and investment opportunities and impacts that are already being seen. And this is bringing together many partners, it's bringing together and advancing policy, the private sector, it's advancing good practice, and it's bringing together financing, knowledge, and many sectors. Now, of course, there's a long way to go, and this is what the presentation is about. There's a long way to go, but we need to start where we are today. And to scale up, we need to start with Nepal's significant development achievements. We need to build on them, enhance them, and scale them up using all of the above financing. So let's start here because it's very positive, and then we'll get to some regional aspects. Nepal is one of 2 developing countries in the world that have expanded forest cover, from 25% to 45% over the past few decades. The other country is Costa Rica. Both of them have taken a community forestry approach. Now Nepal has this great asset that they need to commercialize, but in a sustainable way. That's the challenge for the future, to create jobs, to create livelihoods, to support downstream industries such as pellets, as the previous panelist mentioned, or furniture and construction that is more resilient. So the forest sector has great promise. We can build on that. It needs more financing, it needs carbon financing, it needs private financing. We can build on that. Malaria was eliminated in Kathmandu and Pokhara. Now maybe a changing climate will bring those vectors back. That's a risk, but it's nonetheless a great achievement. COVID vaccination rates are the highest in the developing world, 85%, in a country that has inaccessible communities high in the mountains. This is amazing. 95% access to electricity, up from 53% in 2010, and of course electricity is much more reliable now in Nepal, and that's due to governance changes. Nepal also rebuilt from the 2015 earthquake, which took a great amount of effort. Now, I want to highlight the last 2 points here. This week, the National Statistics Office, with support from the World Bank and others, came out with a poverty rate that is now less than 4%, using the 2011 poverty line as the baseline. That's down from 25% 12 years ago. So almost 2% reduction in poverty each year for 12 years. This is amazing. Nepal is a development champion. And this presentation was not meant to just be rah, 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 Nepal, 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 because there's a long way to go, really. 4.9% GDP growth. So how is the growth going to occur over the coming years? Well, the growth is threatened, and these development achievements are threatened by polycrisis. Maybe you've heard this word. It was actually created in the 1970s and got lost in academia. Now it's back. Polycrisis, climate change, disasters, environmental risks, natural hazards, jobless recovery from COVID, fiscal challenges. The fiscal space is fairly small, but it's manageable in Nepal. But in several other countries, it's really a problem. Maldives, Sri Lanka. These are 2 other countries I work on, Sri Lanka and Maldives. But there's a new way to approach development and economic growth, and that is to recognize that it's the interdependence of people, planet, and prosperity, and you can't pursue one without the other. And this is why Nepal has taken this approach to green, resilient, inclusive development. And now I'm going to show you why it's important for regional aspects. I'm just going to give you 2 examples. One is the Indo-Gangetic Plain. This airshed is the most polluted airshed in the world. It's a high cost to South Asia with 2 million premature deaths each year, 40,000 in Nepal. 5 years life expectancy is lost on average. Annual welfare costs of over 10% of GDP per year. And there's a high correlation between poverty concentrations and air pollution concentrations. So we need to act. Bangladesh, Nepal, India, Pakistan, even Bhutan, all face the air quality challenge, and it's a shared global public bad that needs to be addressed. And it's been addressed in other parts of the world that used to be really bad, including in my country, Los Angeles, in the 1970s. More recently, Mexico City and Cairo, Egypt. The second one is that climate vulnerability is regional. The water regime is changing in South Asia. Many of you are already fluent on these issues, but one of the gaps is on hydrometeorological services and early warning. One of the objectives of the GRID platform here is to make sure that all Nepalis have access to early warning. And there are some very good successes to scale up. Regional collaboration on hydromet services enable synergies, economies of scale, and better products and services at lower cost. And Nepal is changing their policy. They're working on a hydromet policy right now. They're investing without external funds at this point in hydromet infrastructure. And so they want to do more. They need some support from the international community to scale that up. And this is a public good. So it's something that benefits, though, the private sector, aviation, tourism, hydropower development, and also disaster response. Okay, so in 2021, 16 development partners, including the IMF, World Bank, the UK, Norway, et cetera, joined with the government of Nepal to sign on to its GRID partnership. And that was broadcasted through the Kathmandu Declaration on GRID. It was renewed in 2023 in November with the joint communique on GRID. And this commits to develop Nepal's GRID strategic action plan. I'll talk about that in a second. It's a whole of government approach led by the finance ministry. It's always a little awkward for me to present on GRID because the World Bank is one partner of many, and GRID is led by the government. So, but just bear with me, please. And the GRID action plan is meant to convene and coordinate diverse funding to scale up action, like I was just talking about. But what is GRID? It's really where sustainability, or green, comes together with resilience and inclusion, because we can't achieve any one of them without all of them. You can't have a green economy if people are excluded from that economy. You can't have an inclusive economy if it's not sustainable. And you're not going to have any of that if it's not resilient to shocks and can bounce back from risks. So the GRID action plan is a 10-year investment plan. I don't want to give you a financial figure, but we're working together to build big investment programs to help implement this plan, and convening all kinds of financing and supporting the government to develop policies that can enable private sector development and investment in some of the key priorities. Right now, the Ministry of Finance is leading consultations at provincial level on the action plan. And hopefully the cabinet will be approving it this year before June. We all need to prioritize our investments, no matter what. The previous panel you heard, there's just not enough money in the world to invest. It just isn't, and especially true in the public sector. World Bank, frankly, we're a drop in the bucket of the needs for development, even in Nepal. So we all need to prioritize. The prioritization criteria for the GRID action plan includes 5 things, and they're actually very simple. 1, which investments can deliver on sustainability, resilience, and inclusion at the same time? Number 2, does the investment build on Nepali successes, and is it scalable? There are a lot of great small things that really can't go to scale. The third is positive tipping points. What are the policies and investments that, even if they're small, can trigger a transformative impact? And the fourth is it implementable in the current context in Nepal? We don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. So projects have to be calibrated to the ability of municipalities to implement it. Nepal has a new federal structure. It's still growing, it's still learning, and that's very difficult sometimes. And then convene financing from all sources. Without private capital investing in grid, it's not going to work. It won't get Nepal to where it needs to be. That's key. All right, so I'm not going to go into all of these in very much detail. This is a regional discussion after all, but I can just give you a flavor. I'll just go quickly through the top 10 grid transitions. These are the investments that we're all collaborating to help define, building on existing projects that are implementing now, existing government budget that's available now, existing private capital that's available now, and building on this with a new generation of investment operations. The first one is managing landscapes at the agriculture, water, forest nexus. In Nepal, like many countries, the sectors are fragmented. You talk to different joint secretaries and secretaries here in Nepal, they want to work together across agriculture, water, and forest. For example, irrigation needs to be sustainable. The country and the Grid Action Plan wants to expand year-round irrigation. But for that to be resilient and sustainable and inclusive, we have to manage the forests, or Nepal has to manage the forests, and has to manage the use of that water for multiple uses. Disaster risk management and shock responsive social protection. Right now, the government is developing shock responsive measures for its social protection policy framework. And hopefully there will be a new generation of investments behind that. Inclusive land administration. Again, Nepal is reforming its land administration framework. The Land Acquisition Act goes back to the 1970s and is woefully out of date. Land use planning has just been required by all 753 municipalities, but there's still a very, very long way to go. And this is one of the priorities in the action plan. Resilient roads and sustainable transport. If a road is part of GRID, Green Resilient Inclusive Development, the road has to be resilient to climate changes, to increased water flow and so on. But also the road cannot contribute to biodiversity and forest depletion. This happens quite a bit. Nepal during COVID has gone through a massive amount of what they call bulldozer roads just being built ad hoc up in the mountains, and erosion happens and it causes all sorts of problems. So the way roads are built is really something that we need to focus on. Half of the World Bank's portfolio is in roads. I think the Asian Development Bank is similar, although I don't want to speak for them. We need to do this differently. One of the newer projects that we're financing finances roads with a green corridor around it to try to bring together the forest and environment sector with Department of Transport, Department of Roads, to come up with a model that could be scaled up. The fifth transition is sustainable cities, green, resilient, inclusive cities. Of course, in South Asia, the urban pollution is one of the biggest issues, and the cities need to be more livable. The sixth is unleashing renewable energy potentials, and here there's a very regional link. So with the Upper Arun project that several development partners and private actors are planning to invest in Nepal, there are downstream impacts, of course, but there's also downstream opportunities as India and Nepal enter into trade agreements for power. So this is a real opportunity, economic opportunity for the region, is to unleash renewable energy, particularly hydropower, but not only. There, of course, India is already moving very far along on solar power. The seventh is access to reliable, safe water supply and sanitation. So the World Bank is gearing up to scale up investment in WASH. That's the acronym here. And there's a lot of opportunity here for private sector action, maybe not so much in Nepal, but in other countries. And the eighth is solid waste management, also an entry point for private sector if the policy environment can be conducive. And plastic management, which we just seem to not be hearing much about these days. And but it's still there as an issue, right? The plastic's not going anywhere, and it's an economic opportunity to come up with alternatives to plastic. I think Nepal is doing some things on that. Air quality. So I'll give you an indication of the future direction that we're moving in the region. The World Bank is engaging with other development partners, the UK, ECMOD, who's based here in Kathmandu, the Asian Development Bank, and the IFC, to try to put together a regional program around the Indo-Gangetic Plain to reduce air pollution. And the way we're going to do that in the Grid Action Plan for Nepal is bring together these same actors to invest in a coordinated program of investment, policy, technical assistance, and advisory services, and private sector support. The last one is leveraging human capital, because at the end of the day, it's all about people. It's all about the livability of the economies that we're in. And there are several issues involved here. There's health, and there's education. We need to upskill people for the next generation of economic opportunities. These are different in different countries, but the skill set is a little bit behind. COVID has reversed human capital gains quite a bit, and so some investment needs to be here as well. And cutting across all of these 10 transitions is environmental governance. The environmental management policy framework needs to be improved in most of the countries we work in. Gender and social inclusion always has a ways to go in all of the countries in South Asia, and enable private capital mobilization. This is a huge agenda, but without it, as I mentioned, this doesn't work. And lastly, an economic opportunity is digital development. There's a lot to do on this. In Nepal, there are 3 artificial intelligence firms that work only with customers abroad. Their clients are not in Nepal, but they're based in Nepal. So there are a lot of opportunities like that if people just look at, dig under the surface a little bit. Okay, how is all of this financed? So you just had a session before this session that really dug into this. So what I would just like to say is there's a few points. One is that development finance, public sector finance, like what the World Bank brings and our development partners, this is just catalytic. That's all we can do is catalyze national governments and private sector to do the big work of investing and implementing things on the ground. Concessional climate finance is tiny. Climate finance is tiny, tiny, tiny. Everybody thinks that there's this huge ball of money of carbon finance and climate finance in the world. There is not. It's small compared to the need. We all have different pots of money of carbon finance, climate finance. I'm even managing one of them, but it's really small. So the biggest opportunity is the financing from the private sector, the government budget, and the efforts of your average Nepalis, like farmers, to manage their land differently. Climate finance can, again, be catalytic. It can top up other activities, but it's very limited. It's not a total solution. It's not a silver bullet. And I'm afraid expectations have been raised all over the world on the potential of carbon finance. Now, of course, the carbon finance world is changing quite a bit. So maybe we'll see more money coming into it over time. But we can't put all of our hopes into carbon finance and climate finance. All finance actually should be climate finance. Everything we invest in, everything you invest in, should all be climate finance. It should all contribute to climate adaptation, resilience, sustainability, and inclusion. Okay, that's one of my points. Now, regionally, we can help lower the costs and attract financing by taking these regional approaches but it requires more upfront work to coordinate across countries, and it's very hard sometimes. NGOs find it really hard to coordinate across the different countries. There's no transboundary water resource management regime in South Asia, unlike, I think, all the other continents and regions. So there's a lot of work that can be done regionally to address some of these issues, and it can ultimately lower the costs and increase the impact over time. River basin management, animal health, airsheds, as we mentioned, and hydromet, as I mentioned. And I want to leave you with examples of the targets that are under discussion. These are not final under the grid SAP. This is my last slide. I see the red flashing light. 80% of people have access to safe, resilient water supply. Now, the SDG objective is, it doesn't have the word safe. It's just access to water supply. But in Nepal, the key thing is access to safe water supply because a small minority of people have access to safe water supply. So it looks great, water supply in Nepal, great achievement, but is the water safe? It's not really. We'd like to cut in half the percentage of people breathing hazardous air. The limit in Nepal is 35 PM 2.5. And right today is 96%, similar in India, similar in Bangladesh, similar in Pakistan. And we need to cut these figures in half. I think we can do it in 10 years. 100% of people covered by an early warning system, 50% female ownership of land, up from almost 24%, 45% forest cover maintained while shifting to sustainable production, 15,000 megawatts installed capacity from renewables, up from over 2,300 today, and triple the year-round irrigated area. That means adding 200,000 hectares. This is just Nepal, right? This is the grid action plan for the next 10 years. And we have significant funding behind this, real funding today to achieve this. I want to emphasize these targets are not yet agreed, they're under discussion. But this gives you a sense of what can be accomplished. And if you think back to the first slide, I don't know how to do this thing, but if you go back to the first slide of all the development achievements that Nepal has made, I think it's attainable. Poverty reduction, down from 25% to 3.5%, almost 4% in 12 years. If they can do that, they can achieve these too. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And we now have two commentators. As I was mentioning earlier, we have Kushal Gurung, CEO of Wind Power Nepal Private Limited, and Sonika Manandar, co-founder of and CTO of Alloy Private Limited. So they can. So what we thought would be interesting is that we had Steve make the presentation, and then Kushal and Sonika would make their interventions in terms of relate to the sort of work they're doing. So 10 minutes each, and there's a timer out there, so maybe Kushal can start and Sonika can follow.
Yes, thank you, Sujip. Very nice presentation. It was on the dot. Thank you, Steve. I think great. In this whole room, nobody disagreed that it is very timely, and for a country like Nepal, especially because of all the impact of climate change we're facing, and also our country has already committed to international commitments like we want to go net zero by 2045, 5 years ahead of the deadline. And also we have already prepared our NDC implementation plan, and also we have our national adaptation plan. But the challenge probably I'll see it already came during the previous conversation is devil is in the detail about the financing. And if we, it's also not about subsidy or climate finance we're looking, it's more about probably how do we level the playing field and how can we make green projects bankable. That was probably the takeaway message I got from Siddhant, who is actually one of our investee in one of the projects that I'm leading. And I want to share my experience with my city, Pokhara. Probably you all have been to Pokhara. I'm from Pokhara, and Pokhara is one, arguably, probably only city in Nepal that has come up with its own carbon neutral plan. So we plan to become carbon neutral by 2045. But as of now, 84% of the household use LPG gas for cooking. And it's a greenhouse gas. And we all know LPG comes from fossil fuel. So our country's SDG target is to arrest the growth of LPG by less than 30% by 2030. We have already missed that milestone way of, like, probably by 2030, 100% of Pokhreli will be using LPG. So in that case, how can we become carbon neutral by 2045? And it's just irony that the Gandagi Urja is actually in Pokhara. And we we generate, make biogas from organic waste, and we actually purify and compress the biogas in a cylinder, so it actually work like very identical to LPG, so it can be used by household. However, because of the cost competitiveness, LPG is a proven convenient technology, and so it's very difficult for a green technology to compete without certain, unless we clear the unfair advantage the conventional fossil fuel are getting. And also, apart from biogas, we produce fertilizer, organic fertilizer. And we all know our country, we import, we rely just on chemical fertilizer and we import all of them. And one of the major source of our forex import is on importing the chemical fertilizer. The problem of over excessive use of chemical fertilizer is also there is soil acidity issue. However, still 85% of the government, the cost of the LPG, chemical fertilizer is subsidized. Meanwhile, for organic fertilizer, if you look for all 3 tier of government, you can see the allocation of government fund is less than $10 million. So the budget is all skewed toward chemical fertilizer. And even in this context, if only, like our plant, we produce around 7,000, we save around 7,000 tons of carbon emissions every year. We have not been able to tap the carbon finance of the thing that we are doing, but if we could get the carbon finance for it, then probably the project will still be profitable without all this disparity that we are facing. And another project that I'm involved is actually with, on the contrary, I'm also involved with this on-grid solar farm project. And that project is like, we don't have any loan, and that is 100% equity, and we are heading towards IPO. That project is profitable because there is a clear buyer and there is a clear IRR that was pre-agreed, and the technology is more mature. So if the facilities that a hydropower project gets by other non-hydro renewables, then those projects will be competitive, and also it's very important to achieve our NDC goals and also to heads to become a net zero by 2045. And hopefully with grid intervention, I hope that this strategic action plan will be passed very soon. If that happens, then with all the 10 targets set there, we'll accelerate our journey towards low carbon economic growth, and probably it will be more inclusive, not just because I think we will survive climate change. And if you see 2020 to 2023, we crossed the 1.5 degree temperature to 12 months, which was very bad. But what will happen is not everybody will make it. So there will be a very unjust transition. So to make the just transition, it has to be, our effort has to be very inclusive. And for that, we should leave no one behind, not just on the paper, but on action. So what I'm seeing with the grid is probably they will also probably address the issue of inclusivity. That is very important too. And thirdly, in country like Nepal, because we have a lot of mountains and hills, and with the climate change, the glaciers are melting, and it's not going to just affect our hydropower, where measure of our investment is there. It's actually 75% bank investment or public fund is there. So they're all at risk because of climate change. So how do we mitigate that risk? We need some insurance, and also there has to be, because at the moment what we are doing is we're just doing the environmental impact assessment on the side by the project, but we are not doing the climate impact assessment on the project by the climate change. So that's also very important, and hopefully one of the target that's set to increase our renewables will cover that. And our government has already made a decision, probably we will not be limiting ourselves to 15,000 megawatt by 2034. I think it's 28,000 megawatt by now. And because the market has opened with India already agreed to buy 10,000 megawatt in 10 years. So there is a lot of excitement among the developers and the lenders alike. But with the river, there is also disasters. And most of our, traditionally we have been living in silos, in villages, in small towns, and they are all connected through the roads. And there are so many Tharokola, these small rivers that transect these roads. And so there's a high risk of disconnections because of over disasters. And so circular economy has to be our major focus in going forward. And to make that happen, back in the day, biogas or cow was the center of a house, and it has the circularity into it. So because the cow will give milk, and also the dung will be used to generate energy and fertilizer. So we were like very much independent, and we didn't have to rely on any external things. However, because now intervention of convenient lifestyle using LPG, and people not very much inclined to farming and not keeping the cows or cow farm back as usual, this circular economy has broken in rural areas. So we have to find a way to revive it. Probably such one ideas could be like aquaponics, where we are using both fish and vegetables, and there is complementary to each other, and we are using the waste from fish to feed the vegetables. And so those could be, if we could introduce such things, and also more climate resilient technologies, because we are still relying on rain-fed agriculture, and even with tripling the irrigation, it may not be sufficient. So hopefully, we are also at one of our project is Mutai Agro, where we are introducing such technology, and we are selling our produce in the market in Kathmandu. We are growing in Kathmandu, and we are selling in Kathmandu, and our farm is very climate resilient. We don't rely on rain-fed water, and it is very much weather resistant. Also, we use less land to grow more. It's a vertical farm. So those things could be replicated all around the country to have more resilient agriculture system. Thank you very much.
I'm very excited, Steve's presentation, because there's so much alignment to whatever I'm doing here in Nepal, and Kusalji's comment, definitely amazing. One of our partners is Muta, so I'm excited to talk about that as well. I'd like to start I would not say comment, but my thoughts on the 3 Ps that was presented: people, planet, and prosperity. The center of my work really relies on profitability. So I would love if we can make it 4 P instead of 3 Ps. So people, planet, profit, and then prosperity, right? Because without profit, I don't believe there will be win-win for all parties. So what I do in Nepal is I lead a company. It's a tech company, mostly trying to bridge the credit gap by bridging the trust gap of the people who are working at the grassroots in the green sector, such as agriculture and electric transportation. And how I am doing it is by bridging the digital gap, because the major part of grid is, I think, inclusivity. And I always question, whenever we are talking about green finance, digitalization, investment, how much of Nepal's population is actually, included, right? Digitally, financially, and thus, what kind of trust that they lack. So I would also like to say maybe the eye of the grid can also be the investability. And the reason I'm saying this is because we work mostly with the informal sector, green micro entrepreneurs. And one of the major things that they lack whenever they try to access the green finance that we talk about in the larger platform is the trust. trust that they will actually use that investment in the green sector that they initially intended to, right? So because of this trust gap, whatever financing is coming into this sector is not actually traceable because, no matter how small is the carbon finance, we still don't know how much of that is actually going towards the hands of micro-entrepreneurs who are actually working in the climate-smart agriculture or the electric vehicle sector. And that is the kind of tool that I'm working on right now. It's a software platform where you can actually track in real time where the money is going. So money will actually tell you from the platform where it's going. So the major motivation for me to do this is to increase the trustability or to bridge the trust gap between any kind of funders or lenders towards the micro-entrepreneurs who would be borrowing or trying to get the finance. I think because the kind of sector that I've chosen to work with, one is electric vehicle, where we are saying we are going to be, we have excessive electricity right now, and electric vehicle is one of the industry that can actually utilize electricity when none of the other sectors are using it. So it's a very beautiful industry, and I started working with the Safa Tempo women drivers. It's a very unique industry in Nepal. If you, I'm not sure how many of you know about it, but it's a sector started by women, 714 of them, all electric, all driven by women, and back in 1995. That's when we started working on a fleet of public transportation that was electric and all owned and driven by women. 35 years later, I don't think we have done very much in electric vehicle. We are, it's a growing industry now. I'm very glad that it is, but I think we lack the kind of finance that by we, I mean the micro-entrepreneurs in this industry, electric vehicle industry, lack the access of finance that they need to really scale, because scalability is also one of the major component of grid that Steve just presented. In that scalability, I think one of the things that I see lacking is the tools that can help the existing micro-entrepreneurs to transition when their technology is old. Right? And I think I heard one of the panelists talk about risk of adopting the newer and greener technology, because green technologies are pretty new, and there's a risk that it might work, it might not work, right? So I think one of the, I would not say problem, but one of my major concern is whenever we talk about green finance or green investment, we always think about, oh, we need incentives, we need subsidy. That's right, because it's a newer field. But I think the subsidy needs to go in terms of mitigating, or not mitigating, but I think the subsidy really needs to be there, or the incentive really needs to be there, where you need to test out the risk of the greener technology. And I think that's where we can at least give that Kickstarter for the greener technology so it can be sustained in the future. So it should not need incentive all the time. I also really liked one of the comment or question from our colleague from NMB. What's the commercial, how to make greener technology commercially viable, right? I think that's something that we really need to look into, because green financing is definitely profitable. Green technology is the new way of making money. That's what I believe. That's why I started my comment from the profitability angle. And I think partnership is definitely a very, very important aspect. And I say this because we partner with Muta, which is one of the company under Wind Power Nepal, Kushalji's company. Why I'm bringing this up here is, the hydroponics. It's not just a way of, growing salad, right? We can also use hydroponics to see how our dairy farmer can use hydroponic to grow fodder, I think you have already tested that in one of the regions in Nepal, and I really loved it. Because during winter, the fodder production really becomes harder for dairy farmers, and how to make them adapt to these newer climate conditions, right? And I think to adopt the hydroponic technology, they need the finance, and to get the finance, they need the trust from the bank, and that's where we come in to help them grow trust using the digital technology to say that, okay, if a farmer is saying he or she is going to need financing to buy the hydroponic technology, then we can prove from our system that he or she is actually using the hydroponics. This is just one of the examples that how we can build onto existing partnership to bring in newer technology in the hands of micro entrepreneurs working at the grassroots to tackle climate change. So that's the side of climate adaptation that we are working with, and climate mitigation, definitely EVs. Even if there's a question on how green EVs are, I think it is still a greener technology than what we have right now, fossil fuels. So I think the adoption and increase of uses of electric vehicles is definitely needed, and that's also where financing is needed. I'd like to really focus on, I think, my takeaway from whatever I heard in this platform today and from Steve's presentation is in the green transition, there are different points, 10 points that he presented. I think 3 points that I could relate to because I work in that is climate smart agriculture. How to help the agri-entrepreneurs to adapt to these newer climate conditions, one. And it is not just a matter of getting the initial finance to grow their produce, but then what about the market linkage, right? If they can't sell what they produce, then there's no income and there's no question of profitability for them. So who is actually being profitable in this entire engagement is one of the questions. And definitely access to risk mitigations, such as one of the example I gave about dairy farmers, how to help them, how to equip them with newer kind of technology so that they can keep doing what they were doing from past few years. And I think the other 2 parts I would love to touch upon is sustainable transport and the linkage of air quality. And what I really loved from your presentation is there's always inequality in terms of the impact poor and vulnerable group gets because of all the transition issue or financing gap or credit gap or trust gap. And I really believe this is the point that we start this with. So yeah, that's my comment. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Steve, you have anything you want to say? Anything? You just a few minutes, 2 minutes, wrap up. Any response you want? And we are going to close it.
Just this issue on profitability, of course, I mean, that's the main logic for any private sector actor to come in. Is it going to be profitable? And they can only live with lack of profitability for a short time. I want to add to that, I think it's your point. Let's remember that farmers are also business people, or should be, and they also need to make a profit on what they do. So I don't think profit is a bad word, but it has to be ethical profit, it has to be sustainable profit, it has to be resilient profit. And if we do it that way, then this is what's needed to achieve the objectives of green, resilient, inclusive development and poverty reduction. So, Nepal is on the right track. Several other countries in South Asia are on the right track, but there's a lot more to do to make growth and poverty reduction robust and sustainable and resilient.
Thank you. So a round of applause to our 3 panelists, Steve, Sonika, and Kushal.